Today, we're going very in-depth with product photography. We're going to turn this little toy drone into this. Now, 99% of the videos that we produce are 100% free, and you can see hundreds of these videos on our YouTube channel right now. But when we create longer, more professional tutorials, we've been selling them on fstoppers.com/store. But I'm excited to say over the next few months, we're going to try something different. We've gotten a lot of sponsors on board, and we're going to be doing much longer, more in-depth, more professional photo shoots, and we're going to be talking about the gear in these videos. Because this stuff is sponsored, we can create longer, more professional videos, and we can still release it free to you guys on YouTube, and this is the first one. Now, as you can tell, this is going to be a really long video, and two of the sponsors we're gonna be talking about more in depth towards the end of this video. But just in case you don't make it to the end, I wanted to give a shout out to Musicbed. If you're looking for a subscription service to use awesome music for YouTube videos just like this, check it out. They even have a month free for wedding videographers if you're in that industry. And then at the very end of this video, we're going to be using Alien Skin's Exposure X4 to give our image a final look. Check that out. Again, we're gonna talk about that later on in this tutorial. Now, I wanted to start out with a bang with this series, and so I'm going to be photographing the DJI Spark. This is going to be extremely difficult because we have to light it in studio, shoot a background, cut it out, make it look like it's flying. It's gonna be a lot of work, but I think we're all going to learn a lot because I've never done anything like this before. Let's get started and let's talk about the camera we're going to be shooting with. This is the Fujifilm GFX 50S. This is a medium format mirrorless camera. It's pretty new technology, and this camera is really making waves throughout the commercial and landscape world. If you followed us on the behind the scenes series on Photographing the World 4, you know that Alaya almost used this camera exclusively as we traveled through North America and South America taking pictures of incredible landscapes. Well, since then, a lot more of my friends have purchased this camera and they absolutely love it. Product photographers are loving it, fashion and portrait photographers are loving it, and then of course landscape photographers are freaking out over this camera as well. Everybody swears that Fuji has the absolute best color, and then with this camera you have the ultimate resolution at over 51 megapixels. Fujifilm also sent over a 90mm macro lens. Now, with this shot, we're not going to be getting that close to the subject, but if you were shooting something smaller and you needed that really short focusing distance, this is the lens for you. All right, so we need to figure out a way to photograph this and make it look like it's flying. And if you know anything about drones, they don't fly straight like this. They fly with their butt up in the air, going forward like that. Now, I've been thinking about this for a few days. I've been trying to figure out a way, how can I suspend this in the air and also keep it steady, because we're gonna be taking multiple images. We don't want this thing moving around. And then I realized, you know what? I don't think I need to suspend this at all. I think I can set it on the table and just lift the butt up a little bit. So this is the simplest solution I could come up with. I'm going to be using 2 sheets of paper to set the drone on. We just want a nice white open area to shoot the drone on, 1, so that I can easily cut it out, but 2, to reflect a little bit of light up underneath the drone. I'm going to be lighting this drone from above, and if you think about the real world, yes, the light is coming from the sky and the sun and everything, but it's also reflecting off the ground and coming up and hitting objects from below as well. This paper is going to help us with that as well. Now, to get that angle on the drone, I have a little case here that we use to hold filters. I'm just going to set this in the back of the drone and make this thing lean forward. Let's go ahead and set this up. All right, so I know I'm going to be shooting the drone from the side, so I think I want a little bit more paper over here. So when I'm setting this up, I just want to make sure that no part of the drone is actually touching the paper. I want everything to be up off the paper because I don't want any shadows to be blocking the that darker parts of the drone, and it's going to make it difficult to cut out. The next thing that I need to do is I want to get these propellers out of the way. Now, I could just remove the propellers completely, but we still need the propellers in the shot, and we need these center pieces of the propellers in the shot to build out the fake propellers later, and I'll show you what I mean as we go. But for these first few shots, what I'm going to do is just move these propellers out of my shot as best I can. And once again, I know I'm going to be shooting from this direction, so I'll probably move this a little bit more, but the idea here is that I want to see as much of the drone as I can. And then once I get the main shot, then we'll open the propellers back up and we'll do a couple shots of those as well. Let's go ahead and set the camera up on a tripod. This is the tripod that we're going to be using today, and this is our next sponsor. This is the Manfrotto 190. Now, we've used a version of this tripod in the past, and I'm happy to say that they've made some improvements to this tripod. One thing is these feet are much better. This tripod also has quick power locks on each one of these legs. We have nice, smooth motion because I haven't brought this to the beach yet. It feels really nice to use. It's also much faster and much easier to see if it's locked than the standard screw type legs. I actually kind of prefer locking legs over screw type legs. One of my favorite features of this tripod, and one feature that I feel like every tripod should have, is the ability to remove this center column and make it go 90 degrees. Let me show you what I mean. You can pull this all the way up, press this button on the bottom, it keeps coming up, rotate this, and push it into place, and then of course we can tighten it back down. This is incredible when you want to be able to shoot straight down on a product. Now, we're not going to be doing this with this product today, but in the past, shooting with a Manfrotto tripod like this that can shoot straight down has been a lifesaver for us. One other interesting, relatively new feature is the Easy Link system right here. It's basically a 1/4-inch thread, and you can attach whatever you want to this. A lot of photographers use this and attach magic arms with lights or modifiers, and you can basically have a studio all in one thing, so you don't have to purchase and carry around an extra light stand. Now, on top of this tripod, we have the MHX Pro-3W. This is a 3-way Panhead. And what's nice about this is you can loosen it and move it around just like any other Panhead, but it has these friction knobs on the side, and you can dial in exactly how much friction you want to have. So you can loosen this arm all the way, but I have the friction turned up a little bit because basically what I hate is when you loosen a tripod head and then it just kind of falls to the side. So you can dial this in exactly how you want it. Now, this head takes a standard Manfrotto plate, and I am using these plates and heads exclusively now because the plates are small enough that I can comfortably leave them on the bottoms of all of my cameras. I hate when plates are gigantic and they don't fit in your camera bag, or you can't grab the bottom of the camera, or it blocks the battery door. This plate's super small and easy to deal with, and it works with every other one of my tripod heads. Probably the best part about this tripod is it's super cheap at around 100, 150 bucks. So if you're looking for a relatively affordable tripod head that pans and tilts, this might be the perfect one for you. So right now I'm just using live view to frame up my shot. I've got kind of a 3/4 angle on the drone. The drone's tilted forward a little bit. I want to make sure that all of the propellers are completely out of my shot. It looks like I can push this off to the side a little bit more. And using live view makes this so much easier. So let's talk about lighting this drone. Obviously, we have a gigantic video light that's lighting up this entire scene. I'm going to be shooting with strobe for this image, and because I'm going to be using high-powered strobes, these lights will not affect the images whatsoever. Normally, I would start with a key light, and then I would add fill and kicker and everything from there. That's what I would do if I was shooting a person. For this image, I'm probably going to work in reverse. I'm going to start with the overall fill light, and then I'm going to add lights to that. Now, because we're trying to replicate an outdoor scene, we need one gigantic light from above. And I could set up a softbox on a boom and kind of hang it over the top of the drone, but I think that's probably a little too difficult. I don't think we need to go that far because above this we have a beautiful white ceiling. So I'm going to use that to our advantage, and I'm going to simply set a strobe on the table to fire up and into the ceiling here. Now, I've got a Profoto B10 and I've got a reflector dish. I'm using this reflector dish just to kind of pinpoint this light. I could fill up the entire ceiling with light, but I think if I can focus the beam right above this drone, I think we'll get a little bit more power out of the light. I know for a fact I'm going to need a lot of power for this image because I'm going to be shooting at a really small f-stop with this lens. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm gonna just go ahead and start out at power 9, which is 1/2 power. And I'm just going to set this on the table like that. All right, let's quickly talk about camera settings. Now, because I'm relatively close to this product, because I'm shooting with a large sensor camera like this, I'm going to get shallow depth of field really easily, and I don't want shallow depth of field for this image. I don't mind if the back rotor is a little blurry, but I don't want to make it look like the first rotor is in focus and then it's super shallow depth of field and it goes out of focus really quick. For this to look like a real shot taken outside, I need to have pretty deep depth of field here. So I am really going to stop down this lens and I'm going all the way up to f32. Now for shutter speed, I am at 1/100th of a second. Don't worry, we're not gonna be getting any of these video lights in the shot because we're stopped down so much. And then for ISO, we're at ISO 100 because we want the cleanest image possible. All right, so let's go ahead and take a test shot just with this one light firing into the ceiling. All right, so as you can see, this is a decent base image. We have large, soft light coming from above, just like the sky, but we need to add the sunlight now. And I think it would be cool if we had the sun or the brightest area of the background coming from the back left of this drone. So to replicate that, I'm going to grab another light on a light stand and let's see what it looks like from behind the drone. So I'm just gonna turn on the modeling light so that I can see where this light is going. And once again, if I had a reflector dish I could use, I could get that even tighter, and we can go a step further and add a grid to this. Basically what I'm worried about is any light spilling out of the side of this and hitting the lens element itself. I don't want there to be any lens flares yet. I want to add that later in post. So adding the grid focuses the light and we're going to be able to hit just the drone alone. Now I'm just going to guess and set this to level 7 power. Let's see what this looks like. All right, obviously that's way too powerful. Let's go ahead and drop this 2 stops. And we will take another image. All right, much better. Now, I know this image isn't looking super contrasty right now, but I'm doing that on purpose. I don't want the image to be so blown out in the back that I can't recover those highlights, and I don't want the shadows to be so dark that I can't recover them either. I can go back in post and I can bump up that contrast. I can dodge and burn this drone and make it look more like it's actually outside. But right now I want a relatively flat image to work with in post because it's gonna give us a lot more options. So at this point, I feel like the back of the drone's looking good, the top of the drone is looking all right, but obviously the most important part of this shot, the front of the drone and the camera, is way too dark. So we're gonna have to add some sort of additional light to this image. Now I could add a hard light and get some really contrasty shadows, but again, I'd rather have a softer image to work with that I could then add contrast to later. So because of that, I think I'm gonna grab a softbox and light up the front of this drone with that. All right, I've decided to use a strip box because I think I can move this around the set a little bit more easily. It's not going to get in the way of my camera, and I can spin it like this and get it real close. All right, so once again, I am just arbitrarily picking a number because this is in a softbox. It's gonna eat up a little bit more light. Let's just choose level 7 and see what that looks like. All right, I feel like that looks pretty good. Maybe I could turn it up a little bit. Let's go up a half stop. All right, I think that looks pretty good. Now, I know you're probably thinking this looks a little boring, and you'd be right. We could certainly make this more exciting in camera if we wanted to, but this is going to be made in Photoshop. So I want to have all those details to play with. I don't want anything blown out or crushed. So I feel like this is a nice flat image, which still has dimensionality to it. I think it's gonna be nice to work with once we get into post. So now it's time to think about the most difficult part of this shoot, and that is dealing with these propellers. Right now they're out of the shot. I can easily cut out the drone and we'll have a really nice looking drone. But how am I going to get these propellers to look realistic, like they're actually moving? I've thought about this. I thought about actually turning the drone on and getting them to spin, but then I would have to move over to hot lights because the strobes would freeze those, and it just seemed like a pain in the butt. So instead, what I'm going to try to do is recreate these propellers in Photoshop, but the real hardest part may not be creating the propellers in Photoshop, but placing them where they should actually be in space. Because I'm not shooting straight down on this, none of the propellers are going to be perfect circles. They're going to be tilted back into space, and there's absolutely no way I could just guess what that would look like. So what I'm going to do instead is open these up and spin them around and take pictures as I spin them around. That's going to create a template or a circle or oval shape where each one of these propellers will be in space, and then I can remove them in Photoshop and add my own. All right, so let's take a shot. And I'm just gonna move them each one click. And next shot. So I think we have all the shots we need now to make this image, but I could have made a mistake. Maybe the drone moved, maybe the camera moved, and so I'm not going to touch this set until I get all of this stuff into Photoshop, make sure it lines up and make sure it works. I would suggest you guys do the exact same thing. If you're working on a product shot, don't wipe everything clean until you know for a fact you have everything you need. Okay, so I have all the pictures in Photoshop now. My background layer is the finished image of the drone with all of the propellers out of the way. I've also stacked all the other pictures where we were twisting the propellers on top. We'll get to those in a second. The very first thing that I need to do is cut this drone out from the background. And the easiest way to do that is to use the pin tool. If you don't know how to use the pin tool, pause this video, open up a new YouTube window, find one of a million videos on how to use the pin tool. It really is one of the most powerful tools in all of Photoshop. It might take you 20 minutes to learn how to use it, but once you do, it will change the way you use Photoshop. So as I was cutting this out, I decided to leave the top middle part of all of the propellers in place and then cut out the propellers because we're going to add our own in a second. And then I'm gonna blur the centerpiece, I think. So once you've created this path, you want to save it. And to save it, all you have to do is rename it. If you don't rename it, the next time you use the pin tool, it will overwrite this path. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to call this drone cutout. Now at this point, if I wanted to, I could come down here and click this little button and it will make a selection. Now that I have the drone selected, I can contract this selection by going to select, modify, and contract. I'm going to contract by 1 pixel. And then all I have to do is make sure I'm clicked on this background layer here. I'm going to hit Control C to copy and Control V to paste. Now, if I toggle off my background layer, you can see that we have the drone perfectly cut out here without the propellers in place. Now let's take a look at each one of these other layers here. You can see we've got the propellers spinning around. What I'm going to do is just turn the opacity down on each one of these. And if you just hit the number keys, I'm just hitting 5. So I can click on each one, hit 5, 5, 5. And as you can see, what it's done is it's made kind of this ghosting effect. I'm not going to use any of these files. I just want to see the shape of each of these propellers because we're going to use that to build our own propellers. So what I need to do now is create another path for each one of these propellers to show us exactly where we need to place our fake ones. Now, to create these paths, I'm going to use the ellipse tool over here. And you wanna make sure that this is set to path and not shape. If it's set to shape, it's going to actually create a shape in its own layer. But paths is just going to create the line. So I'm going to create these oval shapes. We're gonna get somewhat close. And then I'm going to hit Control T to transform. And we're just gonna be pushing and pulling this around to try to get it to be the exact right size.
We don't need no morning light. And all the vampires in the city wanna run out in the streets. They rule the world tonight.
All right, that's pretty good. Let's move on to the next one. So if you zoom out now, you can see that we have the exact paths drawn of where each of these propellers will go. Once again, to save this path, we need to rename it because it's just called work path right now. I'm going to call it props. Now I can go ahead and delete all of these other layers with these propellers because I'm not going to be using that. So now we need to actually create these blades. We need to make them look like they are moving. And maybe there's a way to do this in some 3D software. Maybe Photoshop can do it. I don't know how. So what I'm going to do is work in 2D space. We're just going to build a square with a circle inside and we're going to start from there. So I'm going to create a new Photoshop document. And let's do 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels. Okay, so now we have a square template, but we need to create a circle and we need to create blades that are perfectly in the middle here. To do this, first of all, I am going to go to View and Rulers. It's going to create rulers and then I'm going to grab the ruler and pull down and you can see it's going to snap to the middle of the canvas for us. Now I am going to create a new layer. You can do that by hitting the new layer button down here or hit Control-Shift-N for new layer. And I am going to make a circle. Now, at the beginning, it's not going to be perfectly centered, but that's okay. Now, when we think about making this propeller, there's a few things that we need to deal with. Obviously, we need the black propeller, but if we go back and look at what these propellers look like, they have these little white tips on the end, and then you can also see white reflecting on the ends of the tips of these propellers as well. I want to try to replicate that. So we've got this circle selected here. I'm going to stroke this with, let's do 15 pixels. And I'm going to color it white. Now you're not going to be able to see it because we have a white background, but if I toggle off the white background here, you can see that a little bit. And then I can drag this circle right to the middle. You can see that line up. So now everything's perfectly in the middle. Now what I need to do is create the blade, and for that, once again, I'm just going to create another layer just so everything's separate right here and I can move it around. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, and let's just make a blade like this. Once again, I'm going to push it to where it's centered, and then for this, I'm going to make it black. So I'm just gonna grab the paint bucket and fill it with black. Now remember, when we go back and look at what these blades look like, they have this white stripe on the end. So I'm going to recreate that with a little white mark here. Let's zoom in so we can get right to the edge. So this time I'm just going to fill this with white. And now I'm going to take this entire layer and I'm going to duplicate it. You can do that by clicking and dragging this to the new layer icon in the bottom. It's going to duplicate it. I can hit Control-T, and then I can rotate it like this and pull it down to this side. Now, if you'll notice here, this is going on top of our white circle. That may not be a big deal, but what I'm going to do is just drag my layer one above everything so that it goes behind. Now, if we go back and look at what we have to cover up here, we have these center pieces, and if I'll toggle on just this background piece. This piece here, we're going to have to blur this in some way, and we're gonna kind of have to hide it. So I want the center to be a little bigger than you might think it needs to be, just because this is a pretty big piece. So I'm gonna go ahead and make another layer here, and I'm just gonna put another rectangle right here. And once again, paint bucket, fill that just like that. And I'm noticing down here, this is coming out a little bit, so we will grab this and push it up to hide that. So right now this looks pretty bad, but I think after we blur the crap out of it and then push it into three-dimensional space, we might be able to pull this off. I am going to first create a new layer with everything that's below it. To do that, I hit Control-Shift-Alt-E. You can see it creates a new layer here, and I'm just going to hide everything else that's below it. Then I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. And we want it to be set to spin. And at this point, we're just gonna have to pick a random number and hope that it looks good. If it doesn't, we'll go back and redo it again. But I'm just gonna pick 54, and let's see what this looks like. Okay, so I think this looks good, but we'll have to see if it looks realistic once we put it into the next document. Now, the easiest way for me to bring the propeller into this document is to stroke this path. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to click on paths here. Once again, I can hit the selection button. Now that I have them selected, I need to create a new layer, Control-Shift-N for new layer, edit, stroke. Let's just do 5 pixels, black, and go. And then when I click off of this, you can see that we have these little ovals. This is just going to help us place these propellers into place. On this new document, I'm gonna hit Control-A to select the entire canvas, Control-C to copy, and then go to our original document and hit Control-V to copy this into place. So at this point, I just need to hit Control-T to transform this, and I'm going to try to fit these 4 propellers into each of these slots. this is looking all right. Obviously, we still need to do a lot of work to make this look realistic, but I feel like the position of these is pretty good, and once we put a background on this, it'll look pretty nice. One thing that I'm noticing right off the bat is these black areas are standing out like a sore thumb here. We really need to blur those. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate the drone cutout layer here, and I'm just going to rename this Prop Blur. Now I'm going to turn off this drone cutout layer that's behind the Prop Blur layer, because when I blur this one that's on top, it's going to start showing what's below it. I don't want to see that right now. I just want to see exactly what I'm blurring. I'm going to go to Blur, Motion Blur, and you can change the direction of the blur. I think a horizontal blur is exactly what I want. And then we just need to find a realistic amount of blur here. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now at this point, I only care about the tips of each one of these propellers, so I am just going to highlight each one of these. I'm gonna hold Shift so that I can do more than one, like this. And then I am going to go to Select Inverse and then hit Delete. So now we can just see each one of the engines, and I'm actually gonna put this below the drone cutout layer and then turn the drone cutout layer back on. So right now we have the sharp drone on top, we have the blurry props below it, and I'm going to create a mask for the drone cutout and then paint away what we want to be blurry. To do that, you can click on this little button down here, which will create a mask. It's going to create a white mask, and to delete part of this, we are going to use a paintbrush with black. And you can see as I paint this away, it reveals the blurry layer below. And I'm just gonna do that for each one here. And as you can see, I've gone way too far here. So what I need to do now is go back to white, and I can repaint all this stuff in. Okay, this is starting to look better, but obviously these propellers still look like cartoons. We have a lot of work to do, and I could start working on them right now, but even though I don't have a background picked out yet, I think throwing any type of sky in the background will really help us work on this. It'll be so much easier than trying to work on this checkerboard background. So I'm just going to pull up a sky that I have here. So I think it's gonna make it a little easier to edit these propellers and make them look realistic now that we have a real sky in the background. I am going to merge each of these propeller layers down by hitting Control E, Control E, Control E, and then I'm just gonna rename this Props. I am then going to create a mask. I'm going to grab the brush. We're going to use black again. I'm gonna change the opacity down to like 35. We're gonna use a big brush, and I'm just gonna start painting away. And we are just gonna start taking away all this white that we've added. We just want there to be hints of it. And remember, because we're using a mask, there's no real way to mess this up. You can always change your brush to white and then undo what you've just done. I think the white lines are still a little prevalent, you know, that they're too sharp. So what I'm going to do is blur those now. And we're gonna go back up to Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur. And then we can move this around and actually see what it looks like here. I don't want to do a ton, but just a little bit. Okay, and now if we feel like, well, it's not so prevalent anymore, maybe we want to add some of that back, we can click back on the mask, go over to our white brush, and then just little areas I can brush back in to have a little bit more of that white. So I think the propellers look pretty decent at this point. Let's go ahead and cut that layer off and let's focus just on the drone itself. I think we can do some dodging and burning here to bring back a little bit of contrast, a little bit more interest to this drone. It looks pretty flat and boring right now. To do that, what I am going to do is create a new layer just from the drone cutout and then the prop blur. So I'm going to turn off the background layer just so that I have these two selected. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Alt-E. That's going to create a new layer. I'm gonna cut these off. And this will be my new drone cutout with blurry props. Above this, I'm going to create a new layer. And I am going to edit, fill, and we're gonna choose 50% gray. We're going to change the blending option here to overlay. Now, if you hold Alt and click right at the bottom of this layer, you'll see this little arrow pop up. I can click on that, and that means it's only going to affect the layer directly below it. So now what I can do is dodge and burn on this gray layer, and it will only affect the layer directly below, which is called drone cutout with blurry props. What I'm going to do is use these tools over here, the dodge tool and the burn tool, and I'm just gonna go around and dodge and burn where I think it will be interesting on this drone. Now we need to add lights to the bottom of this drone, and this is a lot easier than you may think. Once again, we're going to go back to the pen tool, and I am going to go through here and I'm just going to cut out each one of these lights really quickly. All right, so I've got everything cut out. Once again, I want to save this path. Now remember, we're on another Photoshop document here, but I'm gonna go ahead and call this lights. Now, when we make these YouTube videos, the #1 comment is always, what song is that at 3 minutes, 32 seconds? Hey, what song was that at the end of the video? Well, I hope you guys are as interested in the music in this video because Musicbed is our next sponsor. They have donated the music for this video and they have a really interesting service. They have a music subscription service. So basically, depending on how you will use the music, if it's for personal use, wedding videography, commercial use, you'll be charged a different fee and you have unlimited access to their entire catalog of music. It's pretty wild. If you're interested in checking out their service, you can use the code Fstoppers for a personal or wedding account. You're going to get 1 month free. It's definitely worth checking out. They have incredible music and it's really affordable. All right, back to this. We need to add lights. I'm going to click on this path and I'm going to make a selection here. I need to create a new layer. I know for a fact that the back lights are red. I'm just going to paint those in with the paintbrush. I know that the front lights are green, so I'm just gonna pick a green color. I'm gonna paint those in. And then what I'm going to do is change the blending mode here to color. And this looks pretty good. It's probably a little bit much, but we'll deal with that in a second. I am going to duplicate this layer here and I'm going to blur, Gaussian blur. And what I just want to get a little bit of glow. You can see this green light coming out right around here. That looks nice. Now let me just zoom in so you can see what we've done here. Just adds a little bit of glow to the shot. So we'll call this glow and we will call this lights. Now you'll see if I turn off the lights, we have a little bit of green still, it's just been blurred, and we have the red of course. I'm going to turn back on the lights layer and I'm just going to lower the opacity until it looks good because we don't want a ton of light here, just a little bit. So this shot's looking pretty good, but before we finalize it, I think we can do a little bit better on the background. Let's head outside and see if we can come up with something with a little bit more foreground interest. So we're here at a local beach and I'm just trying to find interesting compositions. I'm not sure what's going to work. I'm sure I'm just gonna have to go through a bunch of these when I get back to the computer, but I'm really enjoying this vertical digital viewfinder. It can either go down or up. I think this is an optional piece that you can buy for this camera, but in certain situations like this is really convenient. All right, there's one more beach around here that has some more interesting rocks and cliffs. Let's head over there. So I purposely wanted to come out here at dusk because I didn't want a super contrasty shot. Again, I can kind of fake it in Photoshop, but because we have a really soft drone, I don't want to have some background that has super hard direct sunlight. Now, I've taken a lot of different images. I feel like we have a lot of variety. I'm sure we have something to work with. At this point, the sun has completely set and we're starting to lose all of our color. So I think it's time to head back to the computer. All right, we're back. I've gone through the skies and I think this is my favorite. I think it looks a little bit better than just a standard sky. Now, I shot this in RAW. I brought it in super flat, so highlights all the way recovered, shadows all the way up, and then we're gonna crunch it back down in a second. Let me first move this drone around and let's find a good place for it in this scene. All right, I think that looks pretty good right there. I'm gonna go ahead and blur the background, but just so I have the original, I'm going to duplicate this background. I'll call it background blurred. And I'm just going to give it a little Gaussian blur. And right now, I feel like the image is so wide, my eye goes to the palm tree more than it does the drone. So I think we need to crop in on this. I'm going to make sure that we uncheck delete cropped pixels so we can come back if we want to. But let's just play with the crop here and see if we can come up with something that's a little bit more drone centered. Let's look at the left side of this shot. Remember how we added the light behind the drone? This little highlight along the side of the drone looks really nice, but it doesn't really look like sunlight here. So let's see if we can lighten up that side of the background a little bit. I'm going to duplicate this layer and call it background blurred lighten. And I'm gonna hit Control L for levels and let's just push this a little bit brighter and hit OK. Now I'm going to hold Alt and click the mask button. It's going to create a mask, and then with white, I can reveal this brighter background. Basically, I just want to make it look like the sun is coming from the left side of the frame. Now, to make this a little bit more believable, I'm going to add a lens flare. I know I'm probably going to get hell on YouTube for doing this, but I think you can do it in a faint way. And because it's covering the background and the foreground, which is the drone, I think it'll look a little bit more realistic. I'm gonna go up to this top layer here and hit Control-Shift-Alt-E to create a new layer. And then I'm going to duplicate that layer again. I'll show you why in a second. Let's go up to Filter and then Render and Lens Flare. Now you can move this around wherever you want. I want it hitting the back of the drone a little bit because I want it overlapping the drone. That's what's gonna make it look more realistic. And you can mess with these different ones. I'm gonna stick with the 50 to 300 and hit OK. And that might be a little bit much for you, but that's why we created two layers, so we can change the opacity here. And just do it a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. And then you'll notice that we've got some other lens flares over here on the foreground. If you don't want that, no problem. Let's create a mask and we'll just take that out. Now for our final sponsor, we're going to be using Exposure X4 by AlienSkin. I've been using this software exclusively for years now to give all of my images a finished look. We're going to be using this as a plugin in Photoshop, but this is standalone software, and a lot of photographers are using this as a replacement for Lightroom because you can open up raw files, do all of your editing, add effects, and then fine-tune those effects. Before I do that, I wanna make sure I create a new layer, or else it's gonna kinda get wacky with the masks and everything that we have. So once again, I'm going to click Control Shift Alt E to create a new layer from everything. And then we're going to go to Filter, Alien Skin, Exposure X4. Now, I've been using Alien Skin for years. I used it when I was a wedding photographer before I sent my pictures to print. And then when I shot commercial jobs, I used it exclusively for every single image. The thing that I love about Alien Skin is it basically gives you a million options for color grading. So if you don't have a great imagination or a huge understanding of color grading like me, having all these presets to start from makes it super easy. And then with the panel on the right, we can go through and fine tune it exactly how we want. So let me show you what this looks like. Let's start with something that looks a little bit more wild. We'll start with cross processing over here. You can see as I mouse over each one of these images, it is going to give me a preview of what they look like. And then once I find one of these that looks good, I can move over to the panels on the right and fine tune it. Give me a few minutes here. I'm gonna go through these, see if I can find one that I really like, and then I'll show you how we can fine tune it after that. All right, I think I'm going to stick with Kodak Ektar 100. It's replicating film. I feel like this effect has really brought out some nice magenta colors in the sky. I think that looks great. So let's go ahead and move over to the panels on the right. Let me show you what we can do. I feel like the blacks are a little crushed, especially in these trees over here on the right. So by moving the black slider here, I can completely change that. I don't want to go too far, obviously. Now, some of these effects add grain. If you like the grain, you can leave it. You can also add more by going to the grain tab down here. I like a little bit of grain. And if you want to, you can double click to zoom in all the way and see all the little details. All right, I feel like this looks pretty good. Let's hit apply and head back into Photoshop. Exposure 4 is free to try, so you can head over to Alien Skin's website, download the program, give it a try. If you like it, use the code Fstoppers at checkout. I think you can save 10%. I guarantee you're gonna love it. This is the absolute best software I have ever used when it comes to giving your images a look. So back in Photoshop, we can toggle this on and off. I feel like I love what it's doing to the sky. I feel like maybe it's gone a little bit far on the right side of the trees and everything. And we can tone that down. So I'm going to create a mask here, and I am going to set my opacity 38's good, and let's just paint some of this color away. I don't want to paint it all away, but just a little bit. And then we can go back and forward and see what that does. I think that looks great. Now, one other thing that I think could really make this image pop, we could really try to add a little bit more exciting color to the water. Let's create one more layer here, and I'm just gonna grab a ridiculous color blue, and let's just paint on top of this water. Let's go ahead and change this blending mode to color. Let's add a mask to this, and let's clean it up a little bit. And I'm just gonna go through the water and remove a little bit where I feel like there might be some reflections from the sky, maybe like here, just to make it a little bit more realistic. Now, the final thing we can do, I went on Google and I got a DJI Spark Logo. Let's see if we can find a cool place to put this somewhere on the shot. Hit Control U, change the lightness, make it white. Maybe we can hit right click, go to blending options, add a drop shadow of some kind. So I'm trying to figure out a good place to put this. Because I've got the water down here, I'm not sure it looks great in the bottom left, and then putting it halfway in the water, halfway on the rock doesn't look great. Maybe right next to it like this. All right, I feel like this looks all right. There's this weird dead branch here. Let's see if I can get rid of that. I'm gonna create a new layer again, and let's just see if I can heal this out of here. Come on, Photoshop. Come on, Photoshop. Oh, hey, that was a good job. Let's get rid of this too. and this. Okay. Add that back in. Oh, this other tree in the background is driving me crazy too. I hate getting rid of this, but it's wrecking my logo. That is amazing. I can't believe Photoshop can do that automatically. All right, let's add the logo back in. No one will suspect a thing. Maybe they will. You can kind of see this branch. All right, now we got to get rid of this entire branch. Let's see if Photoshop can do this. Pretty good. Pretty good. Wow. All right, I like it. I like it. All right, I think that wraps up this image. This took way longer than I expected it would, but it was a difficult image. I knew it would be pretty complicated, but hopefully you guys have learned something. I know I learned a lot just from trial and error on this thing. Huge thanks to our sponsors for making this possible. As you guys know, most of what we release on YouTube is free anyway, but when we have multiple sponsors like we do for this video, we can afford to make longer, better, more professional content that we release for free. If you'd like to go even deeper with product photography, head over to fstoppers.com/store. We did a product photography tutorial with Brian Rogers. He's an amazing product photographer. His tutorial, I don't know how long it is, 6-10 hours, something. It's goes into so much more detail than this tutorial here. And we have tons of other tutorials as well, some of them up to 20 hours long. You can see why it takes so long and so much money to produce those type of things. But hopefully we can continue getting sponsors like we did for this video, which will allow us to release more professional content for free on YouTube as well. Now, if you would like to see more content like this and you'd like to get it for free, the best thing you can possibly do is like, subscribe, share this video. If this doesn't get any views, then the sponsors are gonna leave. If this gets a ton of views, then it's gonna be super worth it for them and super worth it for us to continue making content just like this. So let us know. It's up to you guys if we continue. I've had a great time on this, but man, this was a tough photo shoot. I'm ready for something easier next time.